Ireland in the 8th century was a land of kings, small, scattered kingdoms, each ruled by powerful clans constantly at war over territory, cattle, and pride. It was also a land ruled by stories. But what happened to Fáelán mac Murchada was no story. It was real, it was witnessed, and it was unlike any punishment the Irish people had seen before. Fáelán was no ordinary man. He was born into the royal Louis de Lange dynasty, rulers of Leinster, one of the most powerful provinces in early medieval Ireland. His lineage stretched back to ancient kings. His bloodline was sacred, his ambitions massive, and for a time, he succeeded. He ruled Leinster as king during one of the most turbulent eras in Irish history, an age of constant betrayal, shifting alliances, and deadly rivalries between kingdoms. There was no single High King of Ireland at this point, just powerful rulers who tried to claim the title only to be crushed or forgotten. Fáelán was ambitious enough to believe he could rise above them all. According to Irish annals, he was a skilled leader, charismatic in council, and fearless in battle. He waged campaigns against neighboring tribes and expanded his influence across Eastern Ireland. He even married strategically, strengthening his ties with rival clans. But that's when everything began to unravel. Power in Ireland during this time wasn't just about war, it was about who you trusted. And Fáelán made the mistake of trusting too easily. In 738 AD, a man named Ed Allen, king of the northern Uniel and one of Fáelán's chief rivals, sought to bring Leinster under his thumb. Ed had ambitions to be High King himself, and he saw Fáelán as a threat. So he offered peace. A formal summit was called near McAilb, where kings from surrounding regions gathered to negotiate alliances. Fáelán arrived with a small retinue, trusting in the honor of the gathering. But Ed had no intention of leaving with a treaty. Fáelán was seized. What followed was not execution by sword or axe. It wasn't exile. It wasn't even hanging. It was pig torture. Yes, real. Historical records mention this punishment. Used rarely, but with devastating psychological and symbolic weight among Celtic tribes. Pigs weren't just food, they were deeply tied to wealth and status. To be devoured by pigs was to be reduced to meat in front of your people. It was the ultimate insult to a man of noble blood. Fáelán was taken to an enclosed pigpen, stripped of his royal garments, and tied to a central stake. The pigs were not docile farm animals, they were wild, semi-feral, kept aggressive by deliberate underfeeding. He was left in the pen alive. At first, the pigs sniffed, grunted, circled, then they began. It started at the feet, gnawing at the toes and ankles. The pain was excruciating, but the psychological horror was worse. He couldn't move, couldn't scream loud enough, and the crowd royals and warlords watched. Because this was more than punishment. It was a message. Rebel against the Uniel, and you'll die like a pig. According to the annals of Ulster, the death of Fáelán was meant to erase his claim to kingship. By dying this way naked, consumed by animals, he was denied the honorable legacy that Irish warriors sought in death. He wasn't to be remembered as a fallen king. He was to be remembered as a feast for beasts. But history has a strange way of preserving what people try to erase. Instead of wiping Fáelán's name from the record, his death became a story whispered in courts and war camps across Ireland. The brutality of it shocked even hardened kings. For some, it was proof of Ed Allen's cruelty. For others, it was a genius political move, fear made flesh. There were no portraits of the execution, no carvings. The poets, the keepers of Irish memory, would not let it fade in hidden verses. They described Fáelán's cries echoing over the hills, the sickening sound of flesh being torn, the stench of blood and filth mixing in the mud. A man once seated on a throne, now screaming under the hooves of swine. Some said it took hours for the pigs to kill him. They didn't rush, they didn't devour. They tore, gnawed, paused, returned, and Fáelán remained conscious long enough to feel it all. His body was a battlefield of teeth and dirt. His bones broke slowly. His flesh peeled back by snouts and tusks. But perhaps the worst part wasn't the pain, it was the humiliation. Fáelán came from a culture obsessed with legacy. To die heroically in battle was the goal of every king. Even to be beheaded or hanged could be twisted into martyrdom. But this was animal death, farm death, the kind of fate fit for traitors and thieves. And he had done nothing to deserve it except exist in the way of another man's ambition. Ed Allen's forces made sure news of the punishment spread quickly. They didn't hide it, they broadcast it. Messengers carried the tale to the southern kingdoms. Scribes recorded it in monastery margins. The execution became legend almost immediately, and the clan of Ed tightened their grip on power. Yet this act of terror may have planted the seeds of rebellion. Within a generation, uprisings rippled through the Irish Midlands. Fáelán's relatives regrouped. New alliances formed around a shared disgust for Ed's brutality. Leinster rose again, not under Fáelán, but under his brother Bran, who would later win back the throne. The memory of pigs devouring a king became a curse and a call to arms. The religious chroniclers of Ireland, the monks who wrote down annals and history, had no love for such barbarism. Even in the stiff, stoic language of their records, there's a hint of revulsion when they describe the event. Fáelán wasn't just a victim, he was a sacrifice to fear. Some texts suggest that his body was left in the pen after death, not buried, not cremated, just left there picketed until there was nothing left. His soul, some believed, could never rest. An Irish spiritual tradition. A body not honored properly was a spirit condemned to wander. That idea that Fáelán's spirit howled through the fields of Leinster became popular folklore. Children were warned not to go near wild pig enclosures after dark. Farmers whispered about pigs acting strangely on certain nights, and in parts of modern-day County Kildare, older generations still tell tales of a man-shaped figure seen limping through the fog, trailing squeals behind him. Fáelán had become a symbol, both terrifying and tragic. Not many rulers in history died such a death. Animal-based executions, while not unheard of, were rare and considered shameful. To be eaten alive was to be dehumanized, and that's exactly what Ed wanted. But that horror backfired. Instead of wiping Fáelán from memory, it made him unforgettable. And Ed, he died only a few years later, under mysterious circumstances. Some say it was illness. Others say he was cursed. His reputation as a brutal tyrant only grew, and when people spoke of his legacy, it always came back to one moment: the king who fed another king to pigs. Centuries later, historians still debate the details of Fáelán's execution. Was it truly pigs? Was it meant as symbolic degradation, or simply a grotesque display of power? But the medieval Irish annals of Tigerneck and fragmentary annals of Ireland do reference the devouring of a king in captivity, tied to beasts of the field. That phrasing, vague but chilling, matches other fragmented accounts that describe the use of pigs as executioners. Why pigs? Because pigs were both revered and feared in Celtic culture. They were prized for food, used in ritual feasts, and seen as symbols of abundance. But they were also associated with filth, consumption, and the grotesque. To be eaten by pigs meant becoming refuse, waste, an object of disgust, not remembrance. And for a king like Fáelán, whose power came from reputation, that was the cruelest punishment of all. It stripped him of legacy. But here's the irony. The very attempt to erase him turned his story into legend. While his killers faded from memory, his name remained, burned into oral tradition, echoed in poetry, and recorded in the dusty margins of ancient manuscripts, not as a king who lost, but as a man who suffered one of the most barbaric executions in Irish history. And over time, his death came to represent something bigger to the people of Leinster. Fáelán became a symbol of betrayal and brutality at the hands of power. He was remembered not for what he ruled, but for how he died. He became an eternal cautionary tale about the dangers of unchecked ambition. And while Ed Allen's reign came and went, while the Neil rose and fell, the tale of the pigs endured. In some versions, the pigs were possessed. In others, The executioners were cursed to hear squeals in their sleep. Still others claimed the soil where he died never grew grass again. Stories exaggerated over time, but the core remained unchanged. A king, betrayed, tied to a post, and devoured alive by pigs. What happened in that pen wasn't just a death. It was a deliberate erasure of humanity. It turned a royal man into meat. And it's why, even now, the execution of Fáelán, Murchada feels more like a nightmare than a historical footnote, because it forces us to confront something deeply uncomfortable that sometimes the most terrifying chapters of history are real, and they're not written in stone. They're written in blood, mud, and screams. So when you hear the squeal of pigs in the distance, remember, once, they didn't just eat scraps. They ate a king. Welcome to Torture's room, where history doesn't whisper, it squeals.